Now, in light of the Matric results that were released last week, Morning Live has invited Professor Mary Metcalfe, an education analyst, who says that we should concentrate on the results earlier in a child's career. Now, in a recent media interview, Metcalfe said that the dropout rate before Matric is more concerning. And joining us from our Durban studio this morning is Professor Mary Metcalfe from the Education Department at Wits University. Also joining us this morning is Professor Sarah Gravett, the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Education at the University of Johannesburg, and she'll be joining us shortly. I do understand she's in the building already. Now, Gravett has pointed out that the success of a school is actually a result of strong and visionary leadership of teachers. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll start with you, Professor Metcalfe. Now, in your view, do you think that the focus should be shifted on other grades instead of solely Matric?
I have a very strong view, and I've had it for a very long time, that the public fascination with the NSC results distracts from the fact that the NSC is the culmination of 12 years of schooling. I think there has been and continues to be an understanding that foundation phase is critical if we don't get the foundation phase right. But we need to take that emphasis into every grade, and in high schools in particular. I'm very concerned that grade 8 and 9 are often seen as the marginal grades in the school, and that all of the best efforts are focused on grade 12 in particular. Why grade 8 and 9 concerns me is that because the least attention is often given to those grades in schools, it's there that we begin to see the build-up to the massive failure, repetition and dropout. And the criticism that is made so often that the Matric class is not the whole class that started schooling, I believe we could correct by more attention to the earlier grades and to 8, 9 in particular. We should publish not only the NSC results for the province, but also its retention rate. For each school, we should publish the Matric result, NSC result, as well as the retention rate. And as a country, we should be aiming not only to improve the NSC results, but also the retention, how many learners we get through to grade 12.
All right, we'll be with you shortly, Mary. Now, joining us also is Professor Gravett, who is in our Johannesburg studio. A very good morning to you, Professor.
Morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you.
Now, do you think it is right that teachers get the blame when schools perform poorly? I mean, just recently, the KZN Education Department said it'll crack the whip on schools which perform poorly. Is it fair?
Yes and no. Yes, indeed. We expect excellent leadership of school principals in schools. We expect committed teachers who are working towards giving the best possible education to our young people. But we also need the strong support of parents, and we also need the strong support of government to ensure that schools are well resourced, to ensure that learning material is available, and also to give the support to those teachers in terms of development. So it's not one role player that has to address the issues in education. Yeah. It is indeed an issue that should involve all role players.
Let's talk a bit more about the issue of quintile schools. Can you just shed some clarity on this?
On the quintiles?
Quintile, yes.
The quintiles address the different levels of poverty in the schools. So 1 to 3, quintiles 1 to 3, are so-called no-fee schools, and those schools cater for the poor children in the country. And 4 and 5 are those schools that are better resourced in the sense that they are in areas where the socio-economic circumstances are much better than those of the quintiles 1 to 3 schools. Yeah. However, it's not that straightforward. You do also find in some quintile 4 and 5 schools children coming from other areas, and these are also often children who don't come from backgrounds with lots of money and lots of privileges.
Yeah, and having said that, Professor, just a couple of years ago, the Basic Education Minister, Angie Motshekga, did announce that she plans to do away with the quintile system in favor of a two-category system. Do you see that working?
I think that would work much better. I'm not quite aware of what the details would be, but yes, one needs to look at the income of the family and not necessarily the area where the school is situated. Some of the quintile 4 and 5 schools are really struggling to make ends meet.
All right. Now, Professor Mary, back to you in Durban. Do you think that the problem of poor results and the dropout rate starts at the foundation level?
There's no doubt that it starts at the foundation level. It's evident in the annual national assessments, and it's evident in everything that we know about education. Too many learners are struggling to acquire the basic skills of numeracy and literacy, and if they're moving into grade 4 and changing the medium of instruction to English, if they're not confident in written and spoken English, and they can't read in English, it actually makes grade 4 a very difficult year. So the emphasis that we have in education must distribute our energies and our resources and our community support not only at the NEC, but nourishing, nurturing, feeding the confidence and the performance of learners all the way through primary school, as well as the bottom ends of high school. Learning to read is something that is challenging for many learners who are not from families where reading is a daily practice and a daily routine. And the exposure to reading tends to come in the reading lesson rather than in a bed night, a story just before the child goes to bed, in reading throughout the day. So the availability of good reading material in the language that the child is using, right from grade 1, from grade R, and exposure to stories and reading before that is crucial.
Now, Professor, do you think we have a clear discourse on education in South Africa?
I think the discourse is, in my view, insufficiently supportive of teachers and insufficiently aware of the huge challenges under which they work. When I watch the narrative unfold at this time of the year, I hear an enormous amount of blaming, and I don't hear sufficient acknowledgement of the difficult conditions under which teachers work and the huge contributions they make. I think that the narrative and the discourse is dominated by frustration with some teachers who are irresponsible and worse. But my experience is that the vast majority of teachers work with extreme dedication, and we as communities need to come behind them. As the department, as Sarah Gravett has said, we need to provide much more consistent support to their professional development. We need to provide much more respectful opportunities for them to engage and learn.
Indeed, Professor, I do agree with you. Now, Professor Gravett, back to you. Do you think it's fair to compare, the academic accomplishments of schools in less privileged circumstances as compared to the more affluent communities?
Before I answer that, I just want to confirm what Mary has just said. You know, I'm very worried about the pathologizing of education in this country. Yes, we need to be critical. Yes, we need to show where the issues are, but the discourse definitely needs to be much more supportive. To come back to your question, of course we know it is much easier for a young person who comes from a privileged background, and often these young people are also in very good schools, well-resourced schools with very good teachers, often with many extra teachers who are paid by the school governing body. Now, of course, it's much easier to do well in such a school than it is when you're really coming from a background where there's little support and nobody's fault. Due to the socio-economic circumstances. So I applaud those young people who get A's and B's and who come from very difficult circumstances.
Yeah, now studies have shown that about half of the curriculum was covered by the end of the year as a result of the lack of resources and teacher absenteeism, amongst other factors. How do you address this?
I do think the CAPS curriculum the revised curriculum that we have now, and it has been revised in the sense that it is much more detailed. It gives teachers a much better understanding of what they should be covering and by when. This does indeed start to address the problem, but it doesn't address the problem fully. I am being told by teachers that, particularly in some subjects and even in grade 1, that the curriculum is very full, and I don't think that is conducive to deep understanding. No. So maybe that is something that needs attention. And then, of course, as Mary said, we have thousands of teachers who are very committed and very hardworking, but unfortunately we also have those who really don't deliver what one would expect of a teacher, and we need to hold them accountable.
All right, Professor Gravett and Professor Mary in Durban, do hold your thoughts. We'll take a short break now and we'll continue our discussions right after this. This is Morning Live. We'll continue after this.
Information-hungry viewers stay with SABC News, as issues on the West are different from issues on the East or here in Johannesburg. So it is not surprising that people who follow the news know that there are two things for sure: that anything can happen, and SABC News will tell you when it does. Because we keep the nation fully informed. We are SABC News.
SABC News Prime Time, live from Johannesburg. Police have made a massive drugs bust in Khayelitsha on the Cape Flats. They seized Mandrax tablets worth 26 million rand. The 529,000 Mandrax tablets seized were hidden in an underground storage facility. A scavenging insect which has destroyed tomato fields abroad has been spotted locally. Several organizations are working together to fend off this potential catastrophe. In 2008, it jumped the Mediterranean from Spain and caused havoc in 15 African countries.
What is a national anthem, and why do we need national anthems?
A national anthem becomes an instrument to foster social cohesion, identity, to create a sense of identity of a country.
It does happen that people feel that they cannot commit to what the national anthem does.
Unity is not formed from the sky. People don't just despise the national anthem, but it is because of certain things that are actually happening. The issue of languages, for instance, the issue of apartheid statues and monuments.
There may be associated problem with the arteries of the heart in patients with hypertensive heart disease, and in some instances it's just pure the muscle disease problem. The statistics show us that half the population of individuals with high blood pressure are not even aware that they've got high blood pressure.
It's the amount of salt we eat, because there's a big influence on our blood pressure levels. So using less salt when you're cooking, less salty spices when you're cooking, not adding salt at the table, but rather using other spices and herbs to flavor your food. And then of course how much sugar you eat is also very important.
If you start becoming uncomfortable, or where you feel that your effort tolerance is becoming less, you can't lie flat, you run short of breath, you start swelling in the legs and so on, it's high time that one should consult a doctor.
Join Health Talk every Saturday for all your health news.
Minutes before 7 o'clock it is on Morning Live, and a warm welcome back. Thanks indeed for staying with us. Now, in light of the Matric results that were released last week by the Basic Education Minister, Angel Motshekga, we have in studio to discuss the state of education in South Africa, Professor Mary Metcalfe from our Durban studios, and as well as Professor Sarah Gravett, who is the Dean, the Executive Dean of Education at the University of Johannesburg. And we'll go back to Durban to Professor Metcalfe, who will tell us more about the state of, the act of covering half of the curriculum as a result of teacher absenteeism. Back to you, Professor Mary.
Thank you, Simpiwe. I think the first thing to note is to agree with Sarah Gravett that the curriculum is a complex and detailed document to guide teachers. On the other side, you have teachers grappling in difficult circumstances, often with learners who have not always covered the curriculum in the preceding years. So again, to say that teachers are not covering the curriculum because of absenteeism is completely incorrect. The challenge is, firstly, that the curriculum is demanding, correctly so, and that the learners have the difficulties we've outlined in terms of difficult home circumstances, difficult learning in previous years. We're working in a project which has involved more than 1,500 schools, where we've been looking at the role of the school management team in supporting teachers by understanding and tracking curriculum coverage so that they can assist teachers to solve problems of curriculum coverage. As long as there's a punitive approach that just says you have to get through, you don't have an attitude of support between the heads of department, the principal and the teachers, which will say, let's see how far you are with the curriculum. How can we assist you in terms, firstly, of using time more efficiently to catch up as much as you can, but how can we assist you to prioritize appropriately within the school so that the learners have the best opportunity to learn. Teacher absenteeism is a very small contributor to lack of curriculum coverage. It's about using time more effectively in the school, and it's about the school management team stepping up and taking responsibility to provide curriculum leadership in the school. And that doesn't happen just because it's a good idea, and it doesn't happen because it's an instruction. It happens because the school management team and the teachers need to be given the support, the training and the tools to change their behavior so that we have greater coverage of curriculum greater solving of curriculum coverage problems, as well as greater coverage of the curriculum itself.
And that support, unfortunately, Professor, has been lacking. I was having a conversation with one teacher the other day who said that the reason she absents herself so regularly from school is that she's not getting paid well, and there's a lack of resources at school. So, it's not an excuse at all. But then I do understand the point where she's coming from. Now, earlier on, Professor, I engaged Professor Gravett on whether she thinks it's fair to actually compare the academic accomplishments of schools in less privileged circumstances and to that of affluent communities. Is that a correct barometer? What are your thoughts on this?
It's a very important question, because on the one hand, we see incredible schools doing amazing things under difficult circumstances, and that's because you have strong school internal leadership, you have principals who are practicing leadership and management that is rigorous, that works on a routine basis to support teachers with the support of communities. So I don't think that it's correct to completely pathologize as if being rural, being poor means you will inevitably do badly. But the trends are clear, not only in South Africa, but everywhere in the world. Children from wealthier families do better than children from poorer families. And it's evident in the results of the NSC in the quintile system. From the poorer schools, a very small percentage of schools pass at 80% and above. In quintile 5 schools, it's only 20%. Quintile 1, the poor schools, only about 20% pass with a pass rate of 80 and above, whereas it's 80% for the wealthier schools. What that means is that as a country we have to know that the challenges of poverty and the challenges of inequality are located in the poorer areas, in the areas that are geographically different in terms of the apartheid history, and we have to allocate our best resources to the poorest areas. That means both administratively and in terms of our teachers, and we have to make sure resources such as infrastructure, school buildings, toilets and books are properly provided for the poor. because they come into school with multiple disadvantage, and then education disadvantage reinforces that.
All right. Thanks indeed, Prof. How can you weigh in on this?
Oh, absolutely. I agree 100% with what Mary is saying. I think the problem also at the moment, even with young people who enter the teaching profession, often don't want to go and work in the rural areas. And we must make it more attractive for these young people to go to the rural areas to work there. So that we also bring in the new way of doing and thinking in those areas. And I couldn't agree also more with Mary. We need to give strong support to the teachers and the school management teams in those areas. If you've never been to some of those schools in rural areas, you don't really understand the very difficult circumstances that some of those teachers work in. And wow, those schools who, despite those circumstances, do well, we need really to applaud the work that they are doing.
Now, Professor, just briefly, tell us a bit more about your concerns about the repetition of certain grades, and I'm guessing that will lead us to the issue of the progression policy.
Yeah, the progression policy is a very controversial policy. You would hear many teachers would express serious concerns about the policy, but you would also find many educationists who would say that research worldwide has shown that it doesn't necessarily help to keep a learner for more than 1 year or more than 2 years in this case in a grade. If you want to address the learning deficit of a learner, then specific interventions must happen. For instance, if you struggle conceptually with maths, just repeating the curriculum as such is not necessarily going to assist you to learn better, but one needs specific interventions. Now, the interesting thing is, of course, with those progress learners into Matric, we do see some of them doing quite well.
All right. Unfortunately, we haven't got much time there, Professor. And Professor Mary Metcalfe in Durban, thank you so much for your time, and as well as you, Professor Sarah, from the University of Johannesburg. Thanks to you, ladies, for joining us. Well, there you have it. A lot of focus has indeed been shifted to the foundation level of school. And, you know, the first 5 years of a child's life are fundamentally important, and they are the foundation that shapes the children's education, health, and life, and learning at school. And it is critically important that this should be the focus area in a child's life. Well, this is Morning Live, and we'll take a short break. We'll be back with more after this.